Hello everyone, and welcome to the Unanswered Questions True Crime Podcast.
I have spent hours and hours investigating this.
He basically told her that people have been killed. Journalists, independent investigators, people like that disappeared. It frightened her to the bone.
There's more to the story than meets the eye.
There were rumors of torture and homicide and sexual abuse, all sorts of egregious, horrendous crimes.
He was polygraphed 3 times. Each of those 3 showed evasions.
His resumes were a skeleton of truth.
He was mad at the world, and particularly mad at the government.
The study that he commissioned had described a fictional terrorist attack.
If people have died over this, it means you're getting close to the truth.
You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say, what the fuck?
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of my new podcast, Unanswered Questions, where every week we'll endeavour to discuss a mysterious unsolved case that has many lingering unanswered questions. So I hope you enjoy, and as always, leave me some feedback on what you think about the show, and rate it as well. Now on to the show. This week we'll be talking about Wayne DuMond. Now, Wayne Eugene DuMond, born September 10th of 1949 and who died on August 31st of 2005, was an American criminal convicted of murder and rape. DuMond's life sentence for a rape conviction received intense nationwide attention in late 2007 when his parole became an issue for presidential candidate Mike Huckabee during the 2008 presidential campaign. Lois Davidson, mother of DuMond rape murder victim Carol Sue Shields, appeared in a 1-minute video entitled Lois Davidson Tells Her Story, which was posted on YouTube. The commercial attacked Huckabee's efforts to get DuMond released from prison early. DuMond was a soldier in the Vietnam War and worked as a handyman and carpenter in communities around DeWitt and Forest City and in Texas. A decorated military veteran, DuMond told reporters that he, quote, helped slaughter a village of Cambodians. End quote. On August 8th of 1972, DuMond was charged with murder in Lawton, Oklahoma. He committed the crime with the help from 2 other men. DuMond used the 17-year-old daughter of one of his accomplices to entice the victim to an isolated location where DuMond and his accomplice beat him to death with a claw hammer. Prosecutors did not charge DuMond after he agreed to testify against the 2 others, though he admitted in court that he was among those who had attacked the murder victim. On October 19th of 1973, DuMond was charged with molesting a teenage girl in the parking lot of a shopping center in Tacoma, Washington. The second-degree assault charge resulted in a 5-year deferred sentence and mandatory drug counseling during the 5-year probation. On September 28th of 1976, DuMond was charged with raping a woman in DeWitt, Arkansas. The charges were dropped before trial with the condition he undergo counseling. Now we get into the Arkansas rape. DuMond received his second sexual assault conviction from a rape perpetrated in Forest City, Arkansas in 1984. The victim, Ashley Stevens, was a 17-year-old cheerleader and third cousin of then-Governor Bill Clinton, who I have spoken about before and who I will be covering in future episodes. In March of 1985, after his arrest but before his trial, DuMond claimed that he was attacked in his home by 2 men and castrated. No arrests were made in the incident, and the intruders were never found. Phil Osterman, the Arkansas State Police investigator who handled the castration case, noted in his report that Dr. Jeff Whitfield of the Elvis Presley Trauma Center in Memphis examined DuMond after the incident and was asked by DuMond's wife whether it was possible the castration was self-inflicted. Whitfield responded that it was possible and that he had noted similar cases of self-mutilation in the past. Fletcher Long, the attorney who prosecuted DuMond for the rape of Ashley Stevens, was skeptical that DuMond could have castrated himself, but he also doubted DuMond's account because there was no evidence of a struggle or that he had been tied up, which should have left ligature marks, and there were 2/3 empty half-gallon bottle of Jim Beam whiskey at the scene of the supposed assault. While in prison, DuMond successfully sued the St. Francis County and Sheriff Coleridge Conley, who publicly displayed DuMond's severed testicles in a jar and later flushed them down the toilet. DuMond was sentenced to life plus 20 years in prison. After Clinton was elected president, a right-wing campaign alleged that Clinton had framed DuMond for rape. Prominent among those pushing for DuMond to be pardoned were Guy Real, author of Unequal Justice, Wayne DuMond, Bill Clinton and the Politics of Rape in Arkansas, Steve Dunleavy of the New York Post, and J. Cole, Baptist pastor for the Mission Fellowship Bible Church in Fayetteville, who had championed DuMond's cause for more than a decade on his radio show. Many of the arguments advanced by DuMond's supporters have since been shown to be incorrect. Dunleavy claimed that DuMond was a Vietnam veteran with no record, despite arrests for violent crime and previous rape charges going back to 1972. The rape victim failed to identify DuMond in 2 lineups, although she had in fact identified him in the only lineup where he was present. The victim had identified 2 other suspects, one an ex-boyfriend, although she had never in fact identified anyone but DuMond. DNA evidence had exonerated DuMond, although no such definitive evidence existed. Bill Clinton had personally intervened to keep DuMond in prison, despite the then governor's explicitly recusing himself from the case due to his distant blood ties to the 17-year-old victim. Dunleavy also referred to the young woman, a minor at the time of the assault, as the so-called victim and asserted the rape never happened. At the time of the trial, only ABO blood typing evidence was presented, which indicated that DuMond, along with 28% of the population, could have produced the semen. In 1987, the victim's genes were given to an expert, Dr. Moses Shunfield, using protein-based, and I'm going to butcher this name, immunoglobulin allotyping, a technique less specific than current standard DNA tests. Shunfield examined a semen spot on the genes. Dunleavy claimed Shunfield told him, quote, "No way, zip nada, no way DuMond was the donor of that sperm, not in a million years," end quote. However, the court documents do not accord with that. In DuMond versus Lockhart, the court wrote, and I quote, "Dr. Shunfield had genetic allotyping performed on the semen found on the victim's pant leg. Shunfield concluded that based on the test, there was a 99+% probability that DuMond was not the rapist because the semen lacked a genetic marker which DuMond possessed." However, Dr. Shunfield's conclusion was based on the assumption that vaginal fluids were not mixed with the semen used for the test. If the semen was intermixed with vaginal secretions, Dr. Shunfield reported that the results would be inconclusive. The victim had testified that DuMond raped her vaginally, then forced her to perform oral sex, during which time he ejaculated, then brief vaginal rape again. She had also testified that she spat the ejaculate from her mouth onto the ground, and that her genes were underneath her body, not near her face. End quote. Contrary to Dunleavy's claims that the victim had first identified 2 other men as her rapist and failed to make DuMond out of a lineup, the court wrote in the background to its DuMond vs. Lockhart decision, quote, "During a photographic show-up, the victim indicated that Ricky White resembled the assailant. However, White was working in another part of the state on the day of the rape, and she did not identify him as the rapist at a 1-person lineup. Later, Walker Stevenson, who matched the assailant's description, who worked near a restaurant which the victim frequented, was placed in a lineup. She did not identify Stevenson as her assailant. Woodcutters working near the area of her home on the date of the rape were also brought in for lineups, but none were recognized by the victim. On approximately October 29th of 1984, the victim observed DuMond driving a pickup truck on a Forest City street and immediately identified him as the perpetrator of the crime. DuMond was taken into custody, placed in a lineup, and identified by her as the man who kidnapped and raped her." End quote. The victim would later tell Governor Mike Huckabee in a personal meeting at which she, her family, and the prosecuting attorney in the case pleaded with him to reverse his decision to release DuMond, quote, "This is how close I was to Wayne DuMond. I will never forget his face, and now I don't want you ever to forget my face." End quote.
The surging presidential campaign of former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is taking some hits for his role in the early release of a convicted rapist in 1996. That release resulted in at least 1 death and strong opposition from the victim's loved ones. As governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee pushed for the parole of convicted rapist Wayne DuMond, despite warnings that the man would likely strike again if released. DuMond was paroled from an Arkansas prison in 1999. He moved to Missouri, where he later raped and murdered 39-year-old Carol Sue Shields. DuMond was convicted of Shields' murder and sentenced to life in prison. In an exclusive interview yesterday, Shields' mother told me Huckabee's role in releasing DuMond makes him unsuitable for the presidency.
I don't think he did enough background research on Wayne DuMond's life, and if he didn't do that kind of research, I don't think he is going to be good for the country.
On the campaign trail, Huckabee has said that he supported DuMond's release because he had no reason to believe the man constituted a future threat. Just last week, Huckabee told CNN, "None of us could have predicted what DuMond could have done when he got out." But in a letter just released, one of DuMond's victims warned, "I feel that if he is released, it is only a matter of time before he commits another crime and fear that he will not leave a witness to testify against him the next time." Katie Couric asked Huckabee what his greatest mistake was.
I've made a lot of mistakes sometimes, particularly in maybe giving people too much benefit of the doubt, keeping people in positions that should have been let go. And sometimes you pay a big price for that.
Mike Huckabee joins us now from Little Rock, Arkansas. Governor, good morning.
Good morning, Harry.
I want to talk about this character, Wayne DuMond.
Sure.
The guy goes to prison. He becomes a kind of a cause celeb back in the day. There were very conservative Republicans there who said the only reason this guy's in prison is because he was convicted of this crime against a woman who was a relation to Bill Clinton. You're aware of all of that noise down there.
Oh, aware of every bit of it. And this is one of those tragic cases that as you look back, your heart's broken, especially for these families. And I don't blame that mother for being angry, and don't even blame her for being angry at me because I'm the only face of this that she sees or knows. But it was Bill Clinton and Jim Guy Tucker who actually commuted Mr. DuMond's sentence, making him parole eligible. What I actually did, Harry, was deny his second commutation request, denied 3 others. He was released because he was parole eligible, and in Arkansas law, governors can neither initiate parole nor can they stop a parole.
Did you make well, let me ask you this first. Did you believe he could have been innocent, and did you believe he should have been paroled?
It wasn't so much his innocence, but it was the sentence and the fact that while he was awaiting trial, someone broke into his home, they hogtied him, they castrated him, they left him for dead. His 2 young sons came home from school, found him in a pool of blood. His testicles were placed on a jar on the sheriff's desk in the Forest City, Arkansas Sheriff's Department. It was a horrible case from start to finish for everybody, for the victims, for him. He received a very harsh sentence, harsh enough that my predecessor, Jim Guy Tucker, in concert with Bill Clinton, who was actually governor at the time, reduced his sentence. That's what made him parole eligible. I considered, because it was on my desk when I became governor, a further commutation, but ended up deciding against it. So I denied it. But it happened, his parole, while I was governor, even though by law governors can't parole anybody.
But you did send him a letter, and in the letter, what did it say?
The letter said that I support your release from prison. That's the part that gets quoted. The part that doesn't get quoted is, but I deny your commutation request. It was a letter of denial of his commutation. And Harry, even after that, when he was parole eligible, it was years later when the parole board finally decided to do it. And that parole board that originally asked me to meet with them was a parole board made up entirely of people appointed by Bill Clinton or Jim Guy Tucker.
And did you at any point try to influence this parole board? Because at least several members say they felt pressure from you to commute this guy's sentence.
Well, they did say that, Harry, 6 years after this meeting that they requested. And that was 3 of the 7 members who said it, all of whom I did not reappoint to their $75,000 a year jobs. Interesting that it took them 6 years to come forth and say it after they lost their jobs and during the middle of an election year in which my opponent in that election made clemencies the primary focus of her campaign. It's a horrible story. And you know the real tragedy, Harry? The real tragedy is there are some families that are hurting and grieving, and some now are wanting to exploit them for political purposes. For American politics to be reduced to the exploitations of crime victims and to reach into their grief and to try to make them the centerpiece, it's really the worst politics of all.
One thing I also need to know, though, there apparently were letters sent to your office from other victims of DuMond's who said, please do not let this guy out of prison. Were you aware of those letters? Did you read those letters?
Oh, absolutely. There weren't a lot of letters. There was one visit from the victim in Forest City. There was a letter from another lady in Arkansas. And that was one of the reasons that I didn't end up commuting that sentence, Harry. It was the influence of the fact that there was just doubts about him getting out without supervision. I just didn't feel comfortable with that.
And in the end, could you have stopped it?
I could not have. Legally, I could not stop his parole. Governors can't do that. They can't start it. They can't stop it. And if one understands the basic essence, For a governor to add to a person's sentence would be double jeopardy.
Yeah.
The separation of powers makes it so that once the case has been adjudicated, a governor can reduce a sentence, but a governor cannot add to it, and stopping a parole would actually be adding to a sentence.
Governor Huckabee, we do thank you for your time this morning. Do appreciate it.
Thank you, Harry. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Let me ask you about a controversial aspect of your governorship. Wayne DuMond,
yes,
a rapist who was convicted, sentenced in Arkansas. The parole board voted not to parole him in August of '96. You announced that you were going to commute his sentence, and then the parole board reversed course and agreed to parole him, and you supported their decision to parole. He was freed, left the state, killed and raped someone else in Missouri. Do you regret supporting that parole?
You know, looking back, certainly I wish that I'd known more than I knew, but here's what I knew. I never commuted his sentence. His sentence was commuted by my predecessor. When he was parole eligible, he had yet not made parole, and I supported that he was parole eligible. Later, the parole board did, in fact, give him their parole.
Did you talk to the parole board?
I did. But it wasn't about Wayne DuMond. I went there, even though there are some tabloid reports that try to make it that I did, I went there to get acquainted with them because I hadn't appointed any of them.
You never mentioned Wayne DuMond?
No, they brought it up to me.
So you did talk to the board about him?
Only thing I said was this. They asked me, did I think that he should be paroled or something to that effect, and I simply said, I think that his case has got to be given, you know, a serious look. What he apparently did when he left was horrible, Tim. But, you know, the issue is he is a person who did a horrible thing before and after. I think all of us regret and have deep, deep, painful thoughts that someone could do something like this.
You or your staff did not pressure or try to convince the parole board in any way, shape, or form?
No, we didn't. And in fact, here's the part that never gets really pointed out. That parole board had all been appointed by either Bill Clinton or Jim Guy Tucker, my predecessors. I don't think I had that kind of power. If I'm that persuasive, I'll be the next president of the United States.
But in hindsight, you regret announcing that you were going to commute his sentence?
Sure. Of course I do, because it turned out not to be as we thought, that he had an exemplary prison record. And he had been commuted by Jim Guy Tucker while he was acting governor, and Bill Clinton knew all about it.
1 month before the Iowa caucuses, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee now leads the polls there, which puts him under greater scrutiny. And one incident from his past is haunting him, the release of a convicted rapist from prison who then committed a double murder. Paul Boyd reports 2 women whose lives were changed forever by that convict are now speaking out.
Don't let him go! Women protesting in Little Rock, Arkansas, demanding a convicted rapist be kept behind bars. Among them, the rapist victim.
Over the past 12 years, I have been able to share the heavy burden of my rape with very few people.
The focus of their anger, then Governor Mike Huckabee, who was considering releasing Wayne DuMond from prison. It was 1996. Today, a decade later, the Wayne DuMond case is haunting rising presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee once again.
It was a horrible case from start to finish for everybody, for the victims, for him.
The Wayne DuMond case has been controversial from the moment of his arrest back in 1985. While he was awaiting trial, 2 vigilantes broke into his family's home and castrated him, then burned the house down. Incredibly, local sheriff Coolidge Conley displayed DuMond's severed body parts in a jar on his desk. Inside Edition interviewed DuMond behind bars.
Disgraceful for a law enforcement officer to lower himself, to condescend to the point that he would take body parts, put them in formaldehyde, and looky here, you know what this is? The way the jury found Wayne DuMond guilty of rape.
DuMond was sentenced to life plus 20 years in prison, but he continued to protest his innocence. Then, a few years later, a parole board recommended clemency. But Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, a distant cousin of the victim, refused to release him. By the time Mike Huckabee became governor, DuMond had been behind bars 12 years for a crime many believed he did not commit. He was granted parole in 1999. Within months of his release, DuMond struck again. Authorities say he raped and killed 2 women in Kansas City, including Carol Sue Shields. Now, her mother is determined to make sure the DuMond case haunts Huckabee's campaign.
If he hadn't been let out, I really think that she'd still be here today. I just don't think he's president material.
And Ashley Stevens, who DuMond raped in 1985, is also blaming Huckabee.
I just tried to do everything I could to keep him in jail because I knew that was going to happen, and I felt so sorry for those families.
Huckabee claims he had no control over the ultimate decision to release DuMond made by the parole board. But 3 former members of the parole board claim Huckabee pressured them to grant DuMond parole.
What pressure did you feel from then Governor Mike Huckabee?
Well, when the governor appeared before the board and indicated his position about DuMond, that's pressure in itself. We've never had a governor to come over and mention a case to us.
Mike Huckabee says that he was invited to that parole board hearing. You disagree?
I disagree.
You're saying he's outright lying?
He's not only untruthful about that, but he's untruthful also about his input.
The real tragedy is there are some families that are hurting and grieving, and some now are wanting to exploit them for political purposes.
DuMond died from throat cancer in prison in 2005, but the impact of his crimes are still reverberating through the presidential campaign of 2008.
Now we come to the Arkansas parole controversy. According to the Washington Post's fact-checker column in September of 1990, then Governor Bill Clinton overrode a recommendation of the Arkansas Parole Board to commute DuMond's sentence to time already served, arguing that, quote, the issue should be left to an appeals court, end quote. The DuMond case. Quote, because a cause célèbre among some evangelical Christians in Arkansas after DuMond claimed to have undergone a religious conversion, DuMond's supporters argue that he was not being treated fairly because one of his alleged victims was a distant cousin of Bill Clinton. They accused Clinton, then governor of Arkansas, of preventing DuMond's release from prison in defiance of the wishes of his own parole board. End quote. When Clinton was campaigning for president in 1992, his lieutenant governor, Jim Guy Tucker, became the acting governor of Arkansas. Tucker reviewed DuMond's life plus 20-year sentence. Because the jury had not been allowed to take DuMond's castration into consideration, Tucker commuted the sentence down to slightly over 39 years. This clemency meant that DuMond would eventually be considered for parole. When Huckabee, then governor, he supported the release of DuMond, with one state official stating, quote, the problem with the governor is that he listens to J. Cole and reads Steve Dalvaney and believes them, not doing other substantiative work, end quote. Huckabee, addressing DuMond as Dear Wayne, wrote to DuMond in January of 1997, quote, my desire is that you be released from prison, end quote. The board's executive session appears to have been a violation of the state's Freedom of Information Act, which says state boards may meet privately only for the, and I quote, specific purpose of considering employment, appointment, promotion, demotion, disciplining, or resignation of any public officer or employee, end quote. Despite the fact that the meeting was closed, there should still have been a record of it, 4 former board members and a former staffer say. They say that Sharon Hansberry, the board's office administrator, ordinarily attends the meetings and takes notes. It was also a common practice around that time, they say, for her to tape record the meetings as well, even though the tapes were often destroyed once the minutes were formalized. Former members of the board say that Hansberry was asked to leave the room when the board went into executive session. A spokesman for the board says that there is no record of what occurred in the executive session, no tape recording of the executive session, or notes, or minutes. As of December 2007, 6 of the 7 Democratic-appointed board members involved were still living. Board chairman Leroy Brownlee said he had no comment. Another board member said he did not remember details of the case. Another could not be reached. 2 more of the 5 members who were present at the closed meeting with Huckabee, Charles Chastain and Deborah Sutler, have stated on the record that Huckabee used the private session to strongly advocate DuMond's parole. Huckabee denies their version, though he admits having met with them. The sixth member of the board still living, Irma Poindexter, who was absent from the meeting, has stated that Brownlee asked her on the governor's behalf to vote for DuMond's parole. This represented a reversal of Brownlee's positions of August 29th of 1996 when he voted against parole, and September 10th of 1996 when he voted against recommending executive clemency or pardon. Brownlee would later be reappointed to another 7-year term on the board by Huckabee. A fourth parole board member, in addition to Chastain, Sutler and Poindexter, confirmed this story anonymously in 2002 and has not yet been identified by name in the 2002, 2007, 2008 news cycle. Huckabee denies the version given by Chastain, Sutler and Poindexter and the anonymous fourth member, though he admits having met with the parole board and talking about DuMond. Now we get into the Missouri crimes. Following his 1999 parole, DuMond moved to Smithville, Missouri in August of 2000, where he married Terry Sue, a member of a church group who visited him while he was incarcerated in Arkansas. On June 22nd of 2001, DuMond was arrested and charged with the September 20th, 2000 rape and murder of Carol Sue Shields of Parkville. DuMond was convicted in the summer of 2003. He was found dead in his cell at the Crossroads Correctional Center in Cameron, Missouri on September 1st of 2005. DuMond had been suffering from cancer of the vocal cords. At the time of his death, charges were being prepared but had not yet been filed for the June 21st, 2001 rape and murder of Sarah Andersek, sorry if I get that name wrong, who was in the early stages of pregnancy. Now we come to DuMond in the 2008 presidential campaign. Wayne DuMond was the focus of a video which was called Devastating and Absolutely Brutal. The video spread quickly on the internet after appearing on YouTube in the early morning hours of December 13th of 2007. It was almost immediately compared to the famous Willie Horton ad of 1988.
Mike Dukakis and Willie Horton changed our lives forever. He was serving a life term without the possibility of a parole when Governor Dukakis gave him a few days off. Horton broke into our home. For 12 hours, I was beaten, slashed, and terrorized. My wife, Angie, was brutally raped. When his liberal experiment failed, Dukakis simply looked away. He also vetoed the death penalty bill. Regardless of the election, we worried that people don't know enough about Mike Dukakis.
Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison.
It's like a baseball player. A lot of times you're going to do an ad and you strike out. Nobody even cares about it. It's rare that you have one where you swing and you hit and you just watch it sail.
My assistant called me up and said they caught Willie Horton. And I said, well, what do you mean they caught him? He's been in prison for life. Why are murderers being let out into the streets? We learned fairly quickly that he was out on a weekend pass, a furlough they called it, and he invaded a couple's house in Maryland, brutalized the man and raped the woman.
Dukakis believed the furlough policy would encourage better behavior in prison by lifers. They need some kind of incentive, or there will be, chaos inside. It was a big story in the local papers. So the minute we had the nomination, we knew we were going to face Willie Horton.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton.
I ran an independent expenditure, which is an outside organization that isn't involved with the actual campaign. We were scared Governor Dukakis, who was running rather large leads in the polls, was going to sweep to victory. So it called for some dramatic campaign action.
Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend.
The impact and the effect, I believe, had a great deal to do with Willie Horton's race.
Horton was an ugly guy, and he looked like everybody's stereotype of a black thug. I can't believe when they made those ads, they didn't know what they were doing, raising racial fears.
Willie Horton was a hardened criminal. People are rightly scared. It doesn't matter if he's black or white or yellow or purple.
But what ultimately killed Dukakis was not the Willie Horton ad, it was the Poly Pavilion answer.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
That was as close as we were going to ever get to the Willie Horton question. We must have done the answer 1,000 times. I know what it's like to be the victim of crime. I'm on the side victims.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent. And
it came right across the plate, and he didn't see it. It was very clear after that first question we were going to go into free fall.
It was probably the first of the great independent expenditures. We didn't have any involvement with the Bush campaign. We had a commonality of interest to continue the Reagan Revolution, and the ad impacted public policy. All across the country, I'll always be glad I did it.
That campaign made clear that the best way to destroy someone was to find an outside group to do the kind of ad that the candidate himself can't do because he'll get killed for doing it, such as Swift boat veterans, for instance.
When the chips were down, you could not count on John Kerry.
John Kerry is no war hero. Now it's become just a usual tactic. In the wake of that race, every Democratic politician I knew was tripping over themselves to vote for 3 strikes laws, mandatory sentencing, anything they could vote for to prove they were tough on crime. What Willie Horton did was create a generation of legislators who voted for everything. And the result was crowded prisons, suspicion in the minority community, tensions that continue to this day.
In a way, I tie this to the state of America today. This was somehow when we started beating the heck out of each other for totally political purposes. This ad, I think, hit at the inner fears of people, and it's just escalated over the last, 28 years?
As one political website put it, quote, "You know how most campaign ads have a shelf life of a day or two? Yeah, this one may be around for a while," end quote.
My name is Lois Davidson. My daughter won't be home for Christmas this year.
Carol Sue Shields won't be home for Christmas because she was brutally murdered by Wayne DuMond. DuMond was in an Arkansas prison for raping a 17-year-old high school cheerleader until Governor Mike Huckabee helped him get out. Thanks to Mike Huckabee, DuMond was released from his Arkansas prison 25 years before his sentence was to end. Then, less than 1 year later, he raped and murdered Carol Sue Shields.
If not for Mike Huckabee, Wayne DuMond would have been in prison, and Carol Sue would have been with us this year for Christmas.
Initially, there was uncertainty about who had created the video. Due to its professional quality, some speculated that it was one of Huckabee's opponents, possibly John McCain. Keith Emmis said that he had made the professional quality video with no expenses, save gas and videotapes, and used friends as volunteer help, including one with video production experience. His uncle, Don Emmis, a Fayetteville DJ, did the voiceover. Now we come to DuMond's marriage and children. DuMond had 6 children and 3 wives. His second wife, Dusty, staunchly supported him throughout his imprisonment in Arkansas, but died in a car crash on January 8th of 1999 after the approval of his parole, but prior to the approval of his release plan. His final wife was Terry Sue. Was Wayne DuMond viciously attacked on Bill Clinton's orders? Did Bill Clinton have anything to do with it? And what exactly happened regarding his parole, and did Bill Clinton have a hand in stopping it, and did Mike Huckabee try and get him released early but was stonewalled? Well, these are all questions that we may never really know the answer to, and unfortunately the answers may never be known. With that, this case remains open, but with many unanswered questions that still remain unanswered. Please rate this show and let me know what you guys think about this and the many other cases I've covered. You can follow me on all major social media platforms, YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. Links are all down below in the description. If you have a case you'd like me to have a look at or cover, don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm your host, and this has been the Unanswered Questions Podcast. Until next time. Next on Unanswered Questions. Gareth Wynne Williams, born the 26th of December 1978 and died on the 16th of August 2010, was a wealth mathematician and junior analyst for GCHQ on secondment to the Secret Intelligence Service, SIS or MI6, who was found dead in suspicious circumstances in Pimlico, London on the 23rd of August 2010 at a flat used to house security services staff.